Hey everyone, today on Aussie Poker, I will be talking through how to play various ace high boards, and this is going to feature from a range of positions from a range of stack sizes. So it's going to be a pretty big mix where I basically picked out 8 different ace high flops. I've also picked out different turn and river run nuts, some being more wet, some being more brickish in that respect, so that we can kind of see not just how to play the ace high boards on the flop but also how that kind of leads to the play on the turn the river as well. So this one's going to be a little bit of a longer training, but it's a topic I've been needing to kind of cover for myself for quite a long time because I've always felt that ace high boards were kind of the boards that maybe came less naturally to me than some others. And so by kind of covering it here and forcing myself to try to explain what the solver is doing, it's also kind of a way for me to kind of learn effectively as well. So with that being said, yeah, our first spot is 100 big blinds in MTT. These are all MTT spots, by the way, just so that's clear. So basically, we have button versus big blind, with the big blind calling, as you can see, they're going to do with a pretty wide range as such. With the bluffs coming from all these sort of suited connected type of hands, and some of these like offsuit high card, low card. But okay, we're really focused more on the flop, and as you can see here, with Ace, King, Queen, Rainbow, that this is the first flop, and anyway, so I'll just pick like the most high card kind of flop possible. I guess showing the Ace like double pairing, and really I haven't covered those for today, but it's a board where yeah, it makes sense that big blind's going to check, given that they don't have Ace, King, and Ace, Queen in their range, as it were, or Aces, Kings, or Queens. So I mean, as far as it goes, is probably like as about it for a board for the big blind as you can really expect. And yeah, that's sort of also reflected in the big blind only having like 40% equity even against the button. Obviously, if you're against, let's say, under the gun versus big blind raising range, that's going to have a lot more of these ace X, these kind of Broadway cards. So again, the equity would be a lot greater again for like under the gun compared to big blind. But even with button versus big blind, yeah, it's still not a great flop for the big blind in a certain sense. But anyway, the big blind checks range, and you can see here the strategy for the button. I suppose one thing I can do with some of the other points, I mean, it is true that you can sort of see some of the next steps, and maybe it gives away some possible puzzles, but it's something you can certainly do with these flops, kind of like in your own time, sort of pause and like figure out how you would kind of play the different runouts with the different parts of your range before you kind of go ahead and compare what the solver gives. It'll just allow you to kind of retain the lessons a lot more powerfully and kind of remember, okay, this is the difference between, say, the strategy I had and what is, the optimal play in the equilibrium, as it were. Obviously, of course, if you're playing in a live setting and your opponent's like making some very big mistakes, then obviously, you're going to like not just follow this blind, like you're going to adapt accordingly. But at least if our opponent's sort of playing like competently, then this is going to be the strategy where it sort of makes sense. We're not really going to do much checking, and that when we do check, it's going to be kind of the cards with some showdown value, like a lot of the weaker Queen X kind of, just checking back. But if you kind of have so I have like the gut shot to go with it, then you are going to be betting more in that case. And also because we do have such a kind of range advantage, as you can kind of see with the chart here, we start kind of better on every part of the range. It means that, we are going to, we are going to kind of bet quite a lot, but not necessarily for the, let's say, the most massive amount. Though you will see some kind of larger bets getting in there where if we hop it here, we can kind of see that it's going to be doing this, with a mix of kind of hands and, not made hands, as it were, like a lot of these sort of gut shots or hands like with a backdoor flush draw are going to be, getting in there and kind of using the bigger sizing, but also buying side, with a lot of the better ace X, like the ace king, being like especially a hand that really likes to use the much bigger sizing. I mean, in an actual game setting, you may decide that, okay, mixing, you know, 3 different bet sizes may be a little bit challenging to get balance right. So you could potentially just simplify it and say, okay, on this flop, I'm just going to bet like 66% pot with nearly all of my range and just like check down the hands with some decent showdown value and, maybe balance out with like a tiny bit of checking some of the weaker top pair and aces just to kind of protect the checking range against a good opponent, or checking like the weakest king X as well. You can kind of see the sort of patterns of the hands that are generally checking here, and then if you just miss this flop, you're still going to fire because if you have a hand like, let's say, 8-6 suited, then yeah, if you get a hand such as, I don't know, like yeah, like 9-8 to fold or 9-7 to fold, like obviously that's a pretty good outcome in that sense. So, so in this instance, I do have the button checking in this spot just because I kind of felt like that would be a more interesting spot to kind of show in this one. I mean, if I sort of covered what happens against a different bet size, the video would probably be a little bit too long, so it's not going to be like an exhaustive coverage for every flop, but just kind of taking like kind of hypothetical and just seeing how it sort of plays out, and then observing the patterns for ourselves. But yeah, I do think that if you did decide to bet like the majority of your range for like 66%, yeah, you're probably not leaving like too much on the table. Like you can sort of see here, like the difference between betting 6.1 and 4.05, like 60 and being like 60% instead of 100% spot with queens. Like it's not, it would be like a mixing error, not an objective error, let's say, to, just pick the one size the whole time. And it just makes your life a lot easier to have this more implementable strategy, in my opinion. Like just pick one size and kind of go with it for the whole of the betting range, as it were. But anyhow, in this case, the button checks, and for this, I did go for a very brickish kind of turn of the four of clubs, so not even providing any sort of backdoor flush draw, kind of coming into a front door flush draw. Also means you had a gut shot of a jack or a ten. Obviously, haven't got there yet, and you can also see a lot of our range is going to be, along with the obvious chunks like are going to be those gut shot hands that are firing. But yeah, in this case, we can see it again. You're just doing a lot of checking from the big blind because, yeah, when the button checks, like they still do have some strong hands in their range. And, the button has just such a massive nut advantage. It means if you were to, let's say, bet from the big blind, you're just very vulnerable to getting raised quite a lot. I mean, yeah, the hands like with the four in it, yeah, kind of these hands where, it's not a case where the button does have like a lot of hands that kind of miss the sport in their range as well. So I'm guessing that's kind of the reason why like these sort of hands that do have either a top pair or a bottom pair are kind of more the candidates for firing. That if you do have like a king or a queen or just complete junk for the most part, you are just going to be checking here. Obviously, yeah, you have hands like 5-3, that is going to be a gut shot, and again these hands like the jack and the 10x, like the weaker ones, yeah, kind of where the bluffs are coming from, where you have that gut shot, you're kind of happy to fold out, say, a jack X if you have 10x as an example. But in general, yeah, the big blind is mostly going to check, and it is something that's kind of interesting to me because I think that on that flop, it is one where, yeah, it's a case where, say, if the button's checking, like in practice, probably a lot of hands that just miss the flop, say in live. But of course, yeah, in solver land, it's going to be a lot of hands with some showdown value, and yeah, it sort of makes sense that when you take a passive line on the flop, that you're going to often continue that line on the turn and just sort of turn these like Queen X, King X, and the 4X into just bluff catchers where if they bluff a lot on the river, you can kind of just call down, I think, with almost any pair and just sort of catch out the many bluffs that they will kind of be firing in that spot, depending on the river, of course. But in this case, yeah, after the button checks and I think it's obviously the value bets are kind of coming from the ace X part of the range and kind of the king X, like especially, the king X with a gut shot are the hands that really like to go for it here. But the other hands, yeah, generally kind of checking more, except, some of the bluffs, as it were, like, say 10-9 suited, that's now a gut shot, that's a gut shot, but yeah. You can sort of see the patterns kind of forming, it's often the gut shot kind of hands, sort of where the bluffs are coming from on these runouts. And yeah, with the big blind here, I have set where the big blind does check a third time, just because that is what the big blind will be doing with the majority of their range. And yeah, you can kind of see a couple of slightly different sizes being used. But for the most part, is kind of this like very small sizing kind of being used when the big blind fires. And yeah, it's going to be the hands like it's sort of the king X, which is sort of betting for value there, with, the ace X sort of using a little bit more of that bigger sizing, targeting a king and some other pairs as such. And then of course, yeah, like a few bluffs as well in the mix. Yeah, like these hands, like say the nine deuce suited, it just has like no showdown value whatsoever, in that respect. But anyway, for like the absolute worst hands are kind of where the bluff's coming from. But in this case, when the big blind does check, seeing the button strategy, yeah, just getting the soul, looking at what hands we kind of check with a third time. Also because of the fact that the big blind is checking a lot of Queen X, it means we can't just go like completely, ballistic in such a spot because they do have some showdown value in their checking ranges. We can see, I mean, even some hands like ace-8 offsuit, yeah, kind of checking just to sort of protect the range and, stop the button being able to just like, fire any two cards at this point. But yeah, when we do bet, we kind of see that it's going to be mostly using this 75% sizing because kind of one of the principles when it comes to what bet sizing to use on the river is that you generally want to bet at least half pot on the river when you're in position because you bet anything less, it's just very easy for the villain just to say, oh, you're just capped here and just to raise over you with a quite decent chunk of hands. Whereas when you pick the somewhat larger sizing, it kind of solves that problem. So yeah, that's why you can't see a lot of the Queen X checking because those hands are probably good, but if the pot gets big, then they're probably not good in a certain sense. Kind of makes sense that all of the underpairs also checking for the same reason that if they bet and get raised, it's just kind of a yuck spot. You're not really, getting value from all that much either when you do that on this particular run out. But yeah, once you sort of have like a King X, like King X is kind of a good enough one to value bet. And if you did sort of get into with an ace, and obviously, yeah, that's a hand that's always going to be going for the value because you're going to get called by a lot of worse hands and such. And also, if they do say bluff raise, you can probably just call it off there as well. But in this case, we do have the button betting 4.5 because, okay, if it checks, obviously the hand would be over. So it's sort of in this video exploring a little bit more the lines where there is some sort of action on the river, like whether that's a bet, whether that's a race, and so forth. And looking at how the big blind responds again, you kind of see that there isn't really much raising being done just because you don't really have many nuts on this kind of run out. So the raising going to be kind of the more obvious, like 8-8, 8-8, Queen 8, and some of these sort of hands. And you're not really kind of many bluffs, like the bluffs here kind of coming from some of these like kind of weak pairs and maybe like sort of marginal between like calling and folding like 8 free suited. But where if you sort of raise at some portion of time, yeah, you might get a queen to fold potentially in some instances, or some of the underpairs to fold. So at least I'm assuming that's the logic. But yeah, in this case, yeah, looking at that, you kind of see that even some of the queen X are now folding when the button bets, just because the button, yeah, is generally going to be betting a pretty reasonable range. Like there are some pretty good like hands like the king X that we saw before they can kind of have in their their double check and then bet the river kind of range. So it means yeah, you kind of need like a hand like say Queen 10 plus to kind of call down or like a hand like with an 8x because with the 8x hands, yeah, like with Jack 8 and 10-8, you are kind of blocking the you're blocking the straights in a certain sense. And these 8-5s also, yeah, you're kind of like unblocking hands would say they're like a 9 in them or a 6 in them or something. But anyway, that's kind of yeah, sort of the idea that if you sort of have like the 8, it's kind of a better bluff catcher than what the queen will be in some of these cases. And I will admit, like, I'm not probably experienced enough with the solves to fully explain why exactly that's the case, but it's kind of all kind of see it, based on, and usually it'll be based around kind of the blockers, sort of unblockers in a way, in that respect. And yeah, if you look at like the buttons range, you see like just how much of a range advantage the big blind that the button has in this spot over the big blind. Where with this run out, it's like well, it says a big blind has 27% equity, so that's kind of another reason why you're almost never raising really in the big blind this spot and why you are kind of folding quite a lot because yeah, just so much of this range, like the majority of it from the button when they bet is yeah, just way ahead of nearly everything that the big blind has here. But anyway, that was the first flop I wanted to break down, and it's true to yeah, with this one, it's kind of this is probably one of the more difficult examples where again I don't pretend to understand every single nuance of it, but I think we can still sort of draw some patterns and see that okay, on the flop immediately the button will kind of bet more often than check, but it's sort of interesting to see how we should sort of adapt our approach when, say, the in-position player does take a more passive line in that respect. So yeah, moving on to the second ace high board that I have, or the ace high flop that I have. Yeah, again, you'll see like the stack size a little bit different. If you're enjoying the video so far, do make sure to leave a like and also to consider subscribing for more of these kind of videos like this, where I'm focusing on making a little bit more around kind of the training and theory sort of point of view, just sort of kind of I could study it on my own, but I think it's just more interesting to sort of share it and force myself to try to explain things rather than just taking it for granted. So there's a little bit of a, I guess, a study journal in that respect. But anyhow, this next one kind of jumped way ahead here, but let's go to the beginning. So for this one, we have the undergun racing at 60 big blinds MTT. This one we have the cutoff calling. So, in these cases where the pre-flop raiser, the aggressor is out of position. So always kind of an interesting spot where it's kind of like, okay, in theory, if you look at the ranges here, the undergun kind of has the sort of the, let's say, the initiative. Not the initiative maybe is that big of a concept in poker, but you can kind of see, there are some hands that, the cups has like the frees and the deuces that are sort of falling out in the under the guns range. But yeah, for all intents and purposes, actually a somewhat similar range in some respects overall. It's just that, you can obviously see that aces, kings, ace, king suit are always going to raise. So it means that like the absolute top of the cutoffs ranges basically was, wouldn't have just flatted on the flop, which means that when we do get to this flop of ace of clubs, jack of diamonds, and then the ten of clubs, so a two-tone all broadways board. Well, it's a spot where, yeah, if we look at the equity, we can see that when when you're figuring out what bet size to use, it basically does come down to who has the equity advantage and who has the nut advantage is essentially the key to break it down. And we can see the undergun has like the equity advantage with the 59%. And okay, maybe the nut advantage runs a little bit closer in the sense that, they still have, jacks and tens in the calling range and the cutoff, that they will be calling these sort of hands, like the jacks and tens, like most of the time. So that's kind of the reason why it's not as much of a nut advantage as you might think here, but it definitely is still a sort of a little bit of a range advantage for the under the gun player. Which sort of you can see in the approach. I do think that probably there are some less experienced poker players, as I just get the hang of the software, that would just kind of like just see bet 100% of hands in this spot, saying, well, I'm there like three Broadway cards, this hits my range, so let's just fire it. But yeah, you can kind of see that the solver will be kind of mixing quite a lot in these spots. And if you look at the hands that are doing a lot more checking, it does fit that it's generally these hands like these weaker ace X hands. And yeah, you can sort of see that if they sort of have the actually it's not really that much of a difference if they have the backdoor flush draw, then yeah, most of them are doing more a little bit more betting in that case than say the ones that don't have the backdoor draw. But it's still doing like a lot of checking and even in those cases as well as you can see here from the chart on the right. But the reason that you'll kind of see a lot of the weaker top pair check in this spot is basically because these hands don't really need so much protection. Like the only cards that really, I think an ace, that a weak top pair would hate to see would really be, hands like say a king or a queen, which would, make it a four line into a straight and kind of turn your hand, I guess, almost into a pure bluff catcher in a way. But other than that, yeah, most of the other runouts just kind of going to be pretty good for you in a sense. Like yeah, even if it's like a jack or a ten pairing, that's honestly not, not that bad in a way, even if it feels maybe a bit scary in practice. But, say if the 10 comes on the turn, it also makes it less likely that they have a 10 in a certain sense. We're looking at the hands that are kind of more the candidates to sort of fire here. The ones that will tend to do more betting. I mean, okay, King Queen is already a made straight in that sense, and your Ace King is top pair, top kicker. So it kind of makes sense, yeah, like that the really nutted hands are going to be mostly firing and not doing that much checking. We're kind of checking back, a little bit of the just a little bit of the king queen suited aces, jacks and tens, like some of these really nut hands we're checking back a bit just to kind of protect the checking range so they can't just like raise with 100% of hands and exploit us to death. But we're looking at the other hands will kind of bet that maybe slightly more in the bluff territory. It's gonna be these hands with a nine in them, like king nine suited, queen nine suited, 10-9 suited. Like these sort of hands are gonna be ones to go for it because like king nine and queen nine, well, queen nine suit's even an open ender, but king nine suit is is a gut shot in that respect. So you are blocking the nuts, and it sort of kind of makes sense when you're sort of blocking the nuts with the king. That's why these hands tend to be the ones doing more of the kind of firing here. And sort of the bluffs, because there aren't really so many bluffs, I guess, on this board. Like meaning that if you just go with the just the king X hands or some of the queen X hands, you're not really finding enough bluffs because like queen nine suit, you have so much equity, it's probably too far to really call the bluff in fairness. So that's why you'll kind of see the bluffs coming from these sort of under pair hands like the eights, sevens, sixes, fives, fours, a bit less of threes and deuces. Because yeah, if you sort of get a hand like 10x to fold, you're very happy. And if you get a hand, let's say, with a king or a queen from the cutoff to fold there, you are denying quite a bit of equity from from sort of an overcard in that respect. So again, not the worst outcome to get a fold in that instance. So for those, that's kind of where your sort of the bluffs are kind of coming from in the range that we do fire here. But looking at how the cutoff will respond to this bet, and again, because we do have this sort of equity advantage, but not so much of a nut advantage, it does mean that we are just going to bet small with a pretty wide range, as we discussed. But looking at how the cutoff responds to this, as I'll just yeah, see how it's all going here. Yeah, you can see that you're not really folding that much in the cutoff, but the hands that do fold, yeah, are going to be these kind of under pairs that just don't really play very well because you kind of only have two outs to really improve to a very good hand. Your 8-7 suit does have the gut shots to go with it, so it makes sense why those sort of hands like with a 7 or better are going to continue to have like a gut shot or you've got or a pair with looking at this part of the range here. And yeah, not really much racing happening just because of the fact that the undergun does have the sort of the range advantage on this flop. But yeah, there's still a little bit of racing happening. Again, kind of these like open ender and these sort of like chunky gut shot hands. Sort of more the bluff candidates is being balanced out with like the king queen as well, just to kind of and also a few of the sets like the lower sets, just to yeah kind of sort of balance out the bluffs and the value in that respect. But overall, yeah, like if you decided to call with virtually your whole range here, like it would be a slight mixing mistake, but it wouldn't be probably an objective mistake if you decide to just call with range to simplify things a lot here. So that's what happens. Cutoff calls now hypothetical. The turn comes. It's actually not a complete brick. The 8 of hearts, because it's true that hands like the 9-7 and the queen jack, the queen nine get there. But looking at how the undergun now kind of plays from this situation, I've kind of used an example of undergun taking a bit more of an aggressive line. It is true that you will see a lot of checking in this spot because it's true that we're kind of betting we're a pretty wide range in a sense. So again, to protect our range, we're going to be seeing a lot of checking from those sort of ace highs, even hands like ace king that, don't really need sort of protection, kind of throwing in a fair bit of checking as well to kind of protect the range here. But yeah, looking at kind of the betting range in this case, yeah, we're seeing that there's going to be some hands like, the main hands like king, queen, and queen nine being the obvious candidates, but also a lot of these kind of pair plus gut shot hands like well, I guess king nine is still a gut shot, but king eight is sort of an example of that pair plus gut shot hand. 9-8 is a garbage pair plus an open ender. Like you're kind of happy to fire it because you have still got equity even against the hands that call you that are ahead of you. So yeah, that's kind of like a bit of the logic of how that kind of works. And yeah, sort of the hands like let's say the king jack, for example, have like a second pair and a gut shot. Yeah, this is a case where the hand's almost like a little bit too good to kind of bet in a way where like if you get bet and get raised, it's kind of a bit of a yucky spot where like maybe you call but you don't really love the situation. So you kind of just check and sort of use them a little bit more just to kind of call down in a sense. But in this instance, yeah, we do see the undergun betting. Again, a small size 3.25, like we sort of have this little bit of a range advantage, but not really the nut advantage. Again, it makes sense why we use a small size and kind of say more the big size when we do have that nut advantage, or another way to word it when the opponent is clearly capped. But that's yeah, not really the case here. So looking at how the cutoff responds to this 33% bet, again, just because there aren't like so many nuts in the range of the cutoff, that's why again you're going to see just a whole lot of calling and yeah, even very interesting itself to kind of see that even some of these weaker ace X hands are now starting to fold here on this turn, just because the turn yeah does complete some of the bluffs is I'm guessing kind of the logic in this instance. But yeah, kind of interesting to see that a lot of the Jack X is calling, and I think the reason for that is that when you have the Jack X, you're kind of just naturally sort of having either a two pair or a flush or some sort of gut shot to kind of go with it in that sense. So that's sort of the reason why I kind of see the Jack X calling because they kind of have more room to improve, whereas the ace X suited doesn't really have room to improve because obviously with the ace of clubs on board, you don't have the flush draw in these combinations here, just the raw kind of ace high. Whereas yeah, even if you have like a hand like a7, that is still technically a gut shot with the nine comes, even if it's a very bad gut shot, but you do still have the top pair to go with it. So it's kind of a heuristic. You kind of need like a pair and a gut shot continue. Like if you have a pair but you don't have at least a gut shot to go with it, or a flush draw, then you are just going to be calling down more. And you haven't really talked that much about the raising range, but it's kind of just like the really nutted hands like King Queen and some of the sets, and then sort of being balanced with a few of these kind of like gut shot sort of bluffs in a sense, like King Nine, King Eight. A lot of the King X again, kind of going for the bluffs here, but and not all the time, but it's a decent chunk, let's say. But as it happens, yeah, with the cutoff calling and the river being just a complete blank in the three of clubs, well, we see here that yeah, the under the gun is now going to be doing quite a bit of checking in this instance. Because yeah, like when the cutoff falls, like you see it when they're already folding like some of the weaker ace X, this naturally means that their range is going to be like somewhat strong at this point. But it also means that a lot of their draws kind of bricked out, which means that yeah, a lot of these hands like these sort of ace X's just kind of work better as sort of a check, just let the opponent kind of just bluff in this spot, and then just kind of catch the bluff is sort of the idea. And with kings and queens here, they're not as good at bluff capture, perhaps. But actually, it's maybe not entirely true. Like actually, they are probably better bluff catchers in a way because you block like king queen and you block yeah, you block king queen with queens. You also block like queen nine as well. So in that sense, yeah, they're actually really good bluff catchers. Check down like probably the best ones, but yeah, and then we just sort of like protect the checking range, yeah, just with like some aces, some Jack 10, like just a few of these, like, set and two pair hands, but only a small number, like we're still obviously going to be getting value from, various hands like a lot of the Jack X actually kind of going for it in this spot, just going for the value. But anyway, when the under the gun checks in this spot, which, like I said, they will do with most of their range in this case, with the bluffs, yeah, kind of coming from the garbage pairs like the pocket sevens, for example. In that case, yeah, looking at how the cutoff continues, again, you're seeing just a lot of checking and and just kind of taking the sort of showdown value, like even with a hand as good as like ace 10 suited or ace jack suited for the top two pair, like it's still checking just because of I guess the fact that the underguns range when they bet twice is going to be a little bit more polar. But as it happens, yeah, like when you do look at the range that that they do fire, that when they do, because you're not betting much, it is going to be for a large sizing, like either going all in for 300% pot, which okay, is a little bit of a special move in a sense, like it's going to be either like nuts like king queen offsuit, or you know or not king, yeah, either king queen offsuit, or just some hand that like has like some sort of garbage pair that is trying to get a better pair to fold, or on maybe perhaps blocking the nuts as well, like say if you have yeah, like if you have Queen 10 suited, yeah, you kind of see it going all in a lot, but that's also because yeah, you are blocking you are blocking like King Queen. So it sort of it makes sense logically from that point of view. So yeah, basically you're just going big with the hands that block the nuts is what we're going for. And if the cutoff does go for this big sizing of 82% to kind of use to see example, then again, you're kind of seeing, yeah, a lot of the like the weaker ace X. Yeah, even hands as strong as ace 10 suited actually kind of folding here, which is a very interesting point. Obviously, yeah, if we have like kind of like top pair, top kicker, that's kind of the threshold where we can sort of call down sort of start calling down more so than folding, as it were. Obviously hands like 10-8, Jack 10 suited are two pair, and ace 10 off is also two pair. So it's kind of like you sort of have enough hands that kind of two pair or better here. That means that if you don't have like top pair with top kicker, or in this case, top pair with second kicker also blocks the nut straight, but below ace queen, you're kind of just doing a lot of folding basically in this instance with a hand weaker than your top pair cat second kicker. So that's kind of the threshold in theory. Like obviously, if your opponent bets this big in live, like if they're just never bluffing, then you can also just fold the hands as a mixing like ace queen, ace king, and just call with two pair or better potentially. But okay, but that's sort of some ideas of how this spot plays, and yeah, I think a very interesting spot that we saw here, one where I mean, this one I think is a lot more intuitive, to be fair, with this range of the undergun against the cutoff. So maybe a little bit easier than the first one we saw, where again the bluffs is kind of coming from the nut blockers in a sense when you've got that gut shot before the river. But let's move on to the third flop I have, and yeah, this is kind of the third one that has a high card, but rather than having two high cards, this is like a ace high card, low card one, just to kind of see how that plays out. Again, when I was putting the output, it kind of jumps ahead a bit. So let's just take it back to the pre-flop where we see the cutoff range. And this one is a free bet pot where it makes sense that, yeah, when the cutoff is right, raising this big of a range, like, all the suited, two cards six and higher, all the, well, obviously two cards nine and higher. Well, it sort of makes sense in that case. There's, even when the button just calls, like they're going to have a better range than the cutoff overall, just because a lot of those junky hands, like the offsuit nines, a lot of the suited sixes folding in the button's shoes here. But here the button decides to free bet, which again you can kind of see as something that the button will do a little bit of the time, mixing the really strong value like aces to tens and the ace king with some of these bluffs, like the weakest kind of aces, like these hands like ace eight offsuit and ace nine off, ace eight offsuit, ace nine offsuit, ace two suited, which I mean technically are kind of profitable calls in these free cases, but you're not really maybe loving it that much in practice, so you do mix in some free bets, and yeah, a lot of these kind of like suited 7x hands also kind of going for this free bet as well at some frequency, and again like kind of the weaker suited kings. Like an easy way to kind of remember the free bet bluffs is all the hands are kind of, let's say, like barely good enough to call, that you're not really loving it. Like say queen ten offsuit, which is going to be like dominate some of the time. Well, you can free bet and you can get hands like king ten offsuit to fold, or queen jack offsuit to fold when you free bet. So that's kind of a little bit of the logic behind that there. And with the suited hands, if you do get called, like you do still have, some decent equity and playability in position with, say, a king five suited or a king four suited, that can still make the second nut flush in a sense, and also have that high card blocker blocking like ace king four bets and this sort of thing. Anyway, maybe that went a little bit too deep into the pre-flop, maybe for a video on flops, but I don't think kind of understanding the range pre-flop is definitely an important part of seeing how it plays post-flop in terms of understanding the overall equity and the nut advantage. Where again we see that there are a lot of four bets happening from the cutoff. With you can kind of see that at this stacked up 4 big blinds at ace is almost always flatting to kind of protect the calling range. That's also why just these hands like a lot of these suited aces like in the mid to high end kind of also are flatting the free bet again just to protect that range that we're again also 4 big blinds are suited connectors, and suited gappers are going to have good playability because they're a lot less likely to be dominated than say a hand like king 10 offsuit, for example. But anyway, the cutoff does call. We have our flop of ace queen free two tone. And it's a case where, yeah, the two tone is not, the two diamonds is not including the ace, meaning that in theory, yeah, the players could still have like, a suited ace with, the ace of diamonds for the nut flush draw, which kind of would be interesting in itself. But let's look at how the overall range is playing. And so it makes sense when you flat a free bet, just because free bets in many cases are just going to be quite polar by nature. At least in the Solglan, it's going to be, the really nutted hands, and it's going to be a bunch of these bluffs like, the 7x and, suited kings, weaker suited aces, these kind of hands that we saw before. So cutoff is really just going to check range for all intents and purposes. Leading into a situation of what the button does on this flop. And as you might expect, yeah, it's kind of a bit of a mixed strategy here, where when you look at sort of the stronger end of checking range, like the hands like aces, kings, queens, hands with a queen in them, like the weakest, like ace deuce suited, or ace eight offsuit, ace nine offsuit. Those are kind of more the value part of the hands that are checking a bit more, just to kind of protect the other parts of the checking range, like the hands like the jack eight, jack seven, 10-7, 9-7, these sort of under pairs that, are kind of like checking and, let's say have showdown value, or, well, I guess like hands like the jack seven suited, yeah, it's some more the suited version of those hands that are kind of checking in that spot because you've got the flush draw. Without the flush draw, you are just betting those hands, trying to get, better hands like higher cards to fold there. And you're also kind of seeing, yeah, that with these sort of, yeah, these cards here that, you do have and then also interesting to notice with the range as well that, the kind of Broadway hands, like we don't really have many suited Broadways. It's only all the offsuit Broadways that we have, because the suited Broadways were just flattered the raise, just having good playability post flop as a general principle. So yeah, we don't have as much Queen X there, but looking at the overall equity, we can kind of see that, yeah, the button does in fact have the equity advantage, and when you sort of have like a clear equity advantage, yeah, on this sort of flop. Yeah, it's very easy to kind of say, okay, well in that case, let's just bet range. But you can see that you can also like protect your range and sort of check and kind of let the let the cutoff also kind of like fire a bunch of bluffs and kind of just call down in a sense. But when you are going to bet, yeah, it is going to be more these like hands like the top pairs, like ace king, ace queen, ace jack, ace 10, being sort of the prime candidates and sort of balancing that with a few bluffs where again, I guess like the tens bluff is just because you're kind of blocking some, blocking some hands like say king 10 or king jack, I guess is or like yeah, king 10 or jack 10. Some hands you're kind of blocking, I guess, with it. There's probably a better explanation out, but it's kind of interesting yeah, to see some of these pairs or some of this 7x kind of some of these hands kind of forming the bluffs, like some of the king X as well, kind of bluffing as well in a way. Like if you don't have the flush draw, I suppose another thing you can also observe is like how often we're gonna find when we do have the backdoor flush draw, we kind of see that, we actually are firing a bit less when we do have the backdoor flush draw and checking more there. Just when you kind of have more sort of equity to work with like the double backdoor. Where say if you bet the double backdoor and they raise, it's just a kind of yucky spot where, you don't really want to call, but you also really want to fold and give up that equity. So the button does check here as they do with not the majority, but let's say like a decent chunk of their range. The turn does come with the nine of hearts, which, yeah, I want to kind of include at least one turn where you have like a double flush draw, because I do think these are the sort of spots that can feel a bit weird to play, because on the one hand, there's maybe a fear-based element for some players where, they don't want to get, let's say, to lose their equity, like say if they, I don't know, check with, let's say, 10-8 of diamonds, and then the other player like overbets, like you kind of feel just a little bit maybe sick inside, like you have so much equity, but maybe not getting the right pot odds against, say, I don't know, a 300% bet or something. Maybe it's not a very rational way to look at betting. It is the way that some live players do kind of think in these sort of situations. But yeah, looking at kind of the range here, yeah, you'll see that in instance I have the cutoff checking like they will with most of their range. But yeah, if you've got a hand like a decent top pair, or if you've got, some sort of equity, you're going to kind of just roll with it. And it's sort of a principle that if you have worked a lot with the solvers, you'll probably know this already, but it's a kind of nice heuristic that people often kind of get the wrong way around in live poker, in my experience. It's basically on the flop, you kind of want to just sort of check or hold down with your flush draws more. Because you already have like that 40% equity. Well, not technically 40, but say like 36% if we're being technical. But the point is you do have that sort of like decent equity even against the higher parts of the opponent's range. You're not really achieving a whole lot by raising because they're still calling with, all the hands that are nearly all the hands are ahead of you anyway in that spot. But it's assuming that your raise are kind of balanced and they're aware of this. But at the same time, when you get to the turn, well, now that equity of like that flush draw coming in is now down to 18%. So it just becomes a much better bluffing candidate when are not really getting as good at odds, but where you still have potential to improve to, if not the nuts, certainly a very good hand when you improve. And also kind of interesting to see, like, say, if you have a hand like ace eight of diamonds, and again, you're just kind of going for it where you're going for value, but also you kind of have like that potential to improve as well with the hand. Whereas a hand like ace six suited again or ace deuce suited, if you have the flush draw, you're just kind of betting more so. But if you don't, then you're just like almost pure checking, as we can see. I mean, to be fair, like ace deuce of diamonds does actually kind of mix, and ace six of diamonds, it does also mix, which again is just about like protecting that checking range so that you do have some nut flushes in your checking range so that if the board comes with a third diamond, then you're not sort of capped in that sense is kind of the idea. Likewise, yeah, with like the king four of hearts, yeah, you're sort of seeing that it is, yeah, generally going to be betting, but if you do have, say, like a hand like king seven of hearts, king nine of hearts, but yeah, it is going to be, well, okay, you can't have king and nine of hearts, but yeah, you can see that Ian's like just picking like one or two of these kind of suited combinations to just like check down with the flush draw just to have that representation. But then with most of the others, it is kind of going for it in that spot. Okay, king queen, you do have the pair to go with the flush draw, so that kind of makes sense. But okay, maybe that's getting a little bit too into the weeds, but yeah, you can kind of see, and it sort of makes sense logically that the bluffs here from the cup are coming from the flush draw. So that's kind of the main point I want to show, and that nearly all the other hands it's sort of going to be just like checking down unless you have like that top pair or better in general. So and also yeah, to see like that the aces are kind of checking a pretty decent frequency here, just because yeah, you don't really need that much protection. There are some boards that can pair and bring a flush draw, and then you just kind of stack the opponent if they hit their flush. So That's kind of the idea. Like aces don't really need as much protection even on the double flush board. But focusing a little bit more on the button strategy with the flop having gone check check and the cup checking a second time, as we see, you're going to be kind of checking a lot of more out of position, which is a little bit of a truism, but still a good reminder. But yeah, in this case, we see that, again, it's mixing between checking and betting, but when we do bet, it's kind of that half pot size. And I mean, half pot size, I think, is just very intuitive here because when you bet half pot, you're just denying that equity where you're not really giving the naked flush draw enough equity to continue, technically speaking. Obviously, it's not factoring in aspects like implied odds. And yeah, you're also kind of like just getting that value from your hand as well, when you do get those calls from the draws. So it's kind of why you see, yeah, this sort of 50 half pot sizing on the double flush board is just kind of a nice one just to get value and also potentially deny equity because yeah, basically looking at the range, you're seeing that okay, obviously like the aces and the queens like the thickest value and like ace king suited are kind of the nutted hands here. But yeah, you're also seeing some bluffs again, kind of coming from those flush draw candidates. You're kind of seeing a king seven, of spades is like this, I guess, very non-intuitive bluff in this spot. Also, a hand like 10-7. Well, okay, 10-7 and only just getting there with the one of the flush draws, so that kind of makes sense. But yeah, like the bluffs are kind of coming also from hands like 8-7s, are kind of like a mergey sort of hand where again you kind of want to kind of use them more when you are not blocking the flush draws because you kind of want them to have the flush draws when you fire with these sort of hands. But at the same time, yeah, with eights it's not that big of a difference. It's kind of like high up and up in the range. But also with kings, you kind of see that same pattern. Like you'd much rather value bet kings when you're not blocking the flush draws. When you are blocking at least one, that just kind of works better as a bluff catcher. With some exceptions, like yeah, if you have the king of diamonds, then again, that's one where you can sort of see that you are, well, I guess we have the king of diamonds, king of hearts, you're kind of blocking both flush draws. So again, you're kind of blocking the hands you're sort of maybe concerned about with the draws getting there. But anyway, it's probably true that, one can maybe explain this a little more concisely, but yeah, you're kind of seeing that the value portion is kind of like the ace high, and again, the bluffs are they're coming more from the flush draws in most cases. And I mean, maybe you don't have quite enough flush draws in this spot to kind of, just kind of have enough bluffs just with them. You will be mixing a few other hands, but again, it's not something that will come up that often, and probably unless you're a very advanced player, you're probably not going to be too, let's say, not going to be too impromptu. You're not finding the king seven suited bluff here, for example. I mean, I guess you do have some gut shots as well to kind of balance it out. So I guess that kind of makes sense with the king jack, king 10, jack 10 offsuit. But anyway, in this instance, we do have the button firing for half pot here and looking at how the cutoff responds to that. Again, you're kind of seeing that, yeah, when you do have the flush draw here, that you are going to be continuing in that spot, because you do have the implied odds to kind of get there in that respect. And yeah, I mean, I wouldn't be too concerned about like these very small percent raises or these very small percent all-ins. But if you do look at it, yeah, it's kind of like these sort of good top pairs that are kind of going for the jam, like just getting that equity from the weaker aces or the combo draws and that sort of thing, and kind of getting it in good. The queen nine suited for two pair as well. So that kind of makes sense. Where like strong top pairs better, kind of the ones that are just going for it. Unless you already have like aces, that's the one exception. But yeah, basically that's sort of showing that yeah, when the button does bet, like we do have to be kind of tight here. That even some of the 9x is kind of starting to fold here. That it's only the 9 with the flush shots really continuing. The junky gut shots aren't really good enough. Because even if you hit your gut shot, like two of those outs not really clean because it will bring in a flush draw. So it kind of has a little bit reverse implied odds there potentially. And I guess that's all the same story with King 10 suited, which yeah, again you kind of need the flush draw to be able to continue, like have the combo draw. But anyway, continuing on with seeing what happens if the cutoff does call, and we can kind of see that's really going to be a pretty tight range. So what happens if the backdoor flush draw does come in with the four of hearts in this case? Well, in this case, yeah, we see that because the button is just has a pretty strong range, like a quite polar range when they sort of bet, it means that we're never really doing any firing ourselves because the button that way we kill out a button to sort of keep in their bluffs and still get them to kind of bluff a lot of hands. And we kind of see that happening a lot here as well. That a lot of the it's sort of an interesting point, yeah. Like obviously the flushes are just going for it with value, and okay, ace three is two pair and ace king's top pair, so kind of yeah, makes sense. Yeah, those hands are just going for it in this spot. Looking at the bluffs, he has kind of hands like King 10 that are sort of like unblocking, at least to sort of block the flush. Those are kind of hands that sort of more the kind of if you have a King of Hearts or a Ten of Hearts, a lot less likely that they have a flush. So that's kind of where the bluffs are coming from in that respect. And some under pairs is sort of complete the range because basically the looking at the range, like we don't really have much showdown value with the nines, eights, and sevens. So it's kind of why those hands are all the nines are like, yeah, obviously a set, but like the eights and sevens don't really have all that much showdown value in a sense, like a little bit, but it just kind of works better just to fire him, as it were. But okay, it's true, those are not hands in here all that often. So the general idea though is we are basically like if we get to this point as the button having fired the turn for a half pot, we're just basically going to be betting like nearly the whole range, like for all in is really the key. Because if you sort of bet smaller and then they jam over you, it's just a bit of a yucky spot with a lot of different cases. So yeah, it just kind of just continuing the approach we'd sort of expect with a bit more of a polar range. Um, and yeah, it's sort of interesting to see that when the diamond draw misses that you're going to be giving up with certain hands like 10-7 suited. But okay, again, it's getting a little bit into the weeds, and yeah, you kind of want the opponent to sort of have the missed diamonds when you bluff here, like just as a general sort of principle. But yeah, in terms of how the cutoff responds to this, when they respond to this jam, I mean, if you sort of look at like if we look at the flop sort of checking range, like just to sort of determine that that then you're not going to be capped in this spot. Like we do see like a lot of the back doors are doing a lot of checking. Like these draws are now like nut flush draws here. So just to show that, it's not like the button is capped. It's not like the button is capped here just because they check the flop because the nuts did completely change on the river as such. And definitely it's also true like these kind of nut changing rivers also can be really good candidates to kind of bluff on. Like let's say if you would kind of play those hands in that way, on the flop and the turn, that are now would be the nuts. But looking at the calling range, yeah, you're kind of seeing that, it's just going to be mostly just the ace X plus that is really calling here. Even hands like King Queen are kind of mixing in this instance. Well, actually, that's not really true, but yeah, it's mixing like King Queen offsuit if you have a heart blocker or like a yeah, if you have a heart blocker, these candidates and also a diamond blocker, yeah, those are like the ideal candidate. But yeah, admittedly, like these blocker properties here, I don't pretend to really fully understand them, but you can kind of see this sort of pattern that yeah, you kind of want to have like very specific blockers, like especially the king of diamonds is kind of the blocker that you really want to have when you call like with a hand like king queen, which is basically just a pure bluff catcher here. Again, I wish I could kind of explain why, because it's not something I fully understand, but that's at least what the solver is showing in this instance. And yeah, it doesn't seem to care too much if you have like the queen of hearts in this spot. Uh, it probably relates kind of to the turn ranges, but and how they were played. But yeah, you can also see like these hands, like yeah, the when you're sort of seeing like these cut hands like calling that, yeah, the queen eight, yeah, obviously is with second pair, same with queen 10 suited, but yeah, basically with the king X, yeah, like with king 7, for example, yeah, it's only calling when you have like the flush draw, when you have the flush come in, which kind of makes sense. Then you're just not a good enough bluff catcher. Then yeah, you do need like the queen X basically to be able to make a profitable call in this spot. If you don't already have the flush, of course. So so yeah, you can kind of see how the range plays out there. I mean, with like 9-8 suit, yeah, even though it's saying you mix a little bit of calling, like probably just on the basis of humans generally under bluff, you can probably pure fold it without losing too much sleep. But yeah, this one I think was quite interesting one, like seeing a very dynamic kind of board and how how we're meant to play it from both sides, both in position. There's a free better and out of position facing the free bet. Because those free bet pots can be quite tough to sort of handle in practice, like not being sure, I guess, like where you stand necessarily with your hand. In terms of the fourth flop, yeah, we'll probably make this one like the last one that we look at, and I'll kind of divide this into a two-parter, right? Because otherwise the video is going to be like 2 hours long, and I do want to, yeah, make sure it is kind of somewhat digestible, let's say. But for our final example, I picked an 80 big blind MTT situation and another free bet pot, just because those free bet pots again can be a bit tricky to kind of handle because yeah, say when you're in the button and you small blind kind of raise you, which As you can see, it's going to be a bit of a polar range, like the really nutted, like aces to tens, really strong aces. Some of these suit aces, semi bluffs, a lot of these kind of suited connectors. Which, again, like if you're playing live, like your opponents might not be finding these sort of bluffs with, say, the queen jack suited to 7-6 suited, or bluffing with, say, the suited nines to just work really well as these kind of like bluff candidates with small blind versus button, just because of how wide the button is kind of firing here. And also, if you sort of look at the button's defending range, like you're kind of seeing that, yeah, they're actually defending pretty wide against the small blind just because of how polar the small blind's meant to be, but also because you are going to be in position, which does allow you to realize a lot more equity of those kind of suited connectors, those suited gappers, like the suited kings, and some of these, these even the offsuit broadways, short of the weakest ones. But yeah, here the button does call, and again, you sort of be able to play a much wider range because you are protecting that range by flatting with like the aces, kings, queens, and jacks nearly all the time. Yeah, by doing that, it just allows you to be able to play a much wider range when they free bet you because it doesn't really just detract from your nut advantage so much. Okay, in any case, on this final example, I have a flop of ace, 8, 7 rainbow. I kind of picked this flop like I could have just used the example that Fedor gave in his MTT tournament masterclass, like 8, 9, 8, but I didn't want to do 8, 8, ace, 8, 7 just for something just a little bit different, but still the same kind of board in a sense, but just for a little bit of variety. And it sort of makes sense, yeah, that obviously when you're the free better, I mean, I shouldn't say obviously, like there are going to be instances where you are like the free better out of position and you will sort of check it in depending on the board. But in general, like a lot of time, you are just going to be using that sort of 25 to 33% sort of bet sizing, just because, yeah, you kind of have this, potentially like a range advantage in a lot of boards. And yeah, we do see, yeah, the small blind does have the range advantage on this board, even though the button, it has like aces, kings, queens, and jacks in the range. It's still a pretty small percentage of their range. They are still calling a lot of these weaker kind of suited hands. So, yeah, normally the small blind is going to fire, and yeah, the solve you can see is mixing a lot of sizes, like 90, like half pot, 25%, 10%, and it sort of makes sense being an ace high board, and you can often bet those kind of boards a bit smaller in my experience, just because yeah, it's like either you have the ace or you don't in a certain respect. But as in this example, I do have the most common sizing of 25% being used, and I mean, yeah, probably if you're like a very, very advanced player, you're going to want to make sure your mixing frequency is correct. But for everyone else, like even if you just decide just to bet 25% with your full range here, you're honestly probably not really leaving much EV on the table by doing that. And it makes it a much easier strategy to execute. I mean, at least that's what I've been doing, and it seemed to work okay for me. But in any case, after this 25% bet, you're kind of seeing that the button is just really not folding all that much here. That, the hands like, well, like a 5-4 suited and, and 10-9 suited, like are obviously straights here. But, a lot of these other hands, like let's say the King 10 suited, like you're often going to have that backdoor draw to go with it. So that's kind of why those hands are continuing, like if you have the back draw, because again, the small blind is going to be betting like their whole range, like all the, lower end of the polar stuff, all the higher end of the polar stuff, well, those hands that have that backdoor equity just kind of a good continues because you're ahead of the bluffs, but you're not, let's say, dead against the value necessarily either. If you get like runner runner, and also again, you're going to see like that when you're facing a free bet and you call it, that it just means that you're not really going to be doing much raising in general. You're just almost always going to be calling because if you start like raising too much, then yeah, it just leaves your range kind of a bit vulnerable, like it leaves the checking range kind of weak. Say if you were raising like aces and ace queen 100% of the time, well, I mean, just naturally going to be kind of capped in a sense if you're just raising all the strong top pair and better. But by checking the aces, eights, sevens, and sixes ensures that you're not going to get capped when you call back on the flop, meaning that they can't just like fire massive against you on the turn and river and put you in a really yuck spot that way. And also we do see, yeah, that the small blind, when the button does call, that even though they're calling with a wide range, again, it means that that sort of equity advantage is kind of not really there anymore, and also the nut advantage is not really there sort of so much either in that case. I can see the equity is like very close to 50%, is even slightly in the buttons advantage, like technically speaking, by like, just over 1%. So when you're kind of out of position and the villain also has, equal equity or more equity than you, it makes sense you are going to be doing a lot of checking. And honestly, at this point, like even though yeah, you're gonna see some hands like 10-9 suit, Jack 9 suited. Well, 10-9 is a straight, but like Jack 9 and Queen 9, yeah, have that. Yeah, you'll see them, yeah, doing like a lot of like just betting, but again, you can kind of see like the EV difference isn't that big between checking and so like let's say if you decide just to check range here in a small blind, like it's not the optimal strategy, but you're probably not leaving that much EV behind if you do it. And kind of the idea of simplifying the strategy science to yourself as you're kind of, let's say, getting into GTO and sort of learning how it works. It just means that you're sort of accepting it. Yeah, maybe you're making a small mistake with some, some very specific parts of your range. This thing gets a little bit wonky here. But at the same time, you're sort of avoiding making much bigger mistakes by trying to, say, have a lot of different bet sizes at once. So it's kind of the idea of simplifying it. But yeah, when the small blind does check here, I think I might have actually done something a little bit weird with the runouts. Just bear with me for one sec. Yeah, there we go. But yeah, when the big blind checks, yeah, when we go to the button, which I get, it jumped ahead of a little bit. But yeah, you'll kind of see that when the small blind checks here, that the button being in position, yeah, is going to be able to bet some of the time. And again, that principle I sort of mentioned before that when you're in position, certainly on the river, yeah, you're usually going to bet like half pot or more. And also we kind of see that applying for the turn that yeah, you want to bet at least half pot when you do bet from the button, and that with it being a lot of these cards, like with it being a free liner to a straight and with the flush draw coming in, yeah, it kind of makes sense that those hands with actually looking here, yeah, a lot of the sort of hands listed, yeah, those bets are not really kind of the flush draws so much. Yeah, you've got some King 10 and King Jack. Well, King 10 is a suit is like a combo draw with the diamonds as well. But yeah, you'll kind of see like a lot of those flush draws are just kind of checking in this spot because a lot of them do kind of have a pair to go with it. When you obviously when there's an ace of diamonds specifically, it means that the nut flush draw is going to be a lot of King X, and you do want to have like sort of some like potential nuts like on certain rivers in your checking range again, just to not sort of cap yourself on different runouts. Plus, guarantee that yeah, even hands as good as Ace Jack, Ace 10 are kind of doing a lot of checking. Okay, Ace 10 also has like kind of the gutter to go with it, but yeah, that's sort of the overall strategy in that case. That when you're sort of betting with hands like the 8-7, 8-6, 7-6, the two pairs are kind of the obvious sort of value, and when you have the 9, you do have kind of the open ender as well, which again makes sense. You're kind of firing those candidates at a decent sort of frequency. Um, and also, yeah, kind of some of these like overcard hands, like say with the Queen Jack or Queen 10, yeah, some bluffs that are maybe a bit less intuitive, but which can still potentially get like the Queen or the Jack to still potentially like have decent showdown value and also get like a lot of the better hands to fold. But in this example, we do have the button just checking as they will do with the majority of their range, and just for fun, I kind of picked a little bit of a wet river, like not the most wet river, like 9 of diamonds would be a lot more wet, of course, but still like completing a four liner to a straight, because I think that it's a very uncomfortable spot where, say, if you have the ace here, like it'd be very hard to know, okay, do I like bet for value or am I just like value owning myself when I kind of like when I bet the river on the four liner, or another thing might be, say like you bet for value like with I don't know ace king and then they raise. It's like, okay, what on earth do I kind of do in this spot? And a possible solution can be just to check a pretty decent part of your range. We're kind of seeing that the bets are generally coming from the hands that are like two pair or better. Obviously, the hands with the 10 have the straight in them, so it makes sense that those are firing. I mean, you don't have that many combos of the five hands, but that's sort of even the lower end of straight is also firing. And then when you sort of add the other parts of range, yeah, it's basically like the sets that are kind of going through it, and also just looking to see if there's like some two pair in there. But I think I also like even some of the 9x also kind of mixing a bit between bet and check, depending on depending on like whether you have the diamonds. Like if you have the diamonds in hand, yeah, you're going to be generally kind of actually kind of depends. Yeah, with the king of diamonds specifically, it seems that you will be kind of betting it more like with king 9 suited. But at the lower combinations, yeah, kind of doing a bit more checking by comparison, as it were. And also, yeah, still checking like a little bit of the 10x in your range, like just to sort of protect your checking range a little, not like too much, but just a little bit like the ace 10, where you're sort of like blocking, say, some of their ace x that they might have. So it means that when they bet, there's quite a bit of their value range is sort of not really there, because you're kind of seeing like hands like ace 4, ace 3, ace 2, ace jack kind of, just checking back and just sort of taking the showdown value with the when you're in the button on the four liner, which all makes sense with all the other hands. And so when you look at the bluffs, yeah, it's kind of I mean the obvious value is going to be, the nut straight with the 10, the second nut straight with the 5x in your range. And so when you look at where the bluffs are coming from, it's kind of coming from these sort of overcards like King Jack, Queen Jack, which is obviously like very, very specific. And also, yeah, with some of these like kind of garbage pairs like the fives, fours, threes, and deuces. Okay, fives is a straight, but if we take like the fours, threes, deuces, say king six suited, queen six suited, it's sort of common out of these hands that these hands don't really have that much showdown value with the way the hand was played with being a free bet pot. But if you do fire them, you do sort of have a much better chance of getting, let's say, some better pairs to fold just because of how wet the run out is. And if we do look at how the cutoff is meant to respond against a nearly pot sized bet, you can see again like a lot of these pairs like the 8x and the 9x are like just basically folding in this instance. Yeah, kind of interesting to see that hands like the Queen eights of hearts specifically being a very good bluff catcher. I'm not sure exactly why that's the case, but okay, if I went really deep in range, I could probably figure it out. But as a general principle, yeah, you can kind of see that we sort of need like sort of some sort of top pair, or say if you're blocking like 10 Jack 10, that's kind of why Jack 9 is sort of a better bluff catcher than a hand like King 9, where because we kind of saw like some of the bluffs are going to be like King 10, King or not King 10, but like King Jack and Queen 10, like some of those sort of hands. You kind of don't really want to block those so much if you can help it. And yeah, you're kind of seeing, yeah, that where the raises, yeah, just going to be like, obviously the nuts with like 10x and, some 10-8 suited and ace, 10-8 suited. Okay, that's actually also straight. So yeah, actually very, very few bluffs, in fact, when you raise like basically a tiny amount of pocket jacks because you block like Jack 10. But okay, that's like very, very, very specific, like maybe not the most practical. And then the main point is that, yeah, basically you're going to be calling with with the good ace X and, or like, if you have the, sort of the blocker like Jack 9, or if you have the 10, obviously, but everything else you're kind of just folding because it's also, and also like in a live setting, it's also like a very underbluff spot. So, obviously, like if in live you decide like to fold, say, the hands like the Queen 8 suited, Jack 8, Jack 9, like, or King 9. Like, honestly, it would actually be maybe a good exploitative adjustment against players who are way under bluffing, like to fold those hands and only call with like ace X plus. But yeah, definitely an interesting spot, and it's always good to see how you're meant to approach these sort of wet toneouts. And I didn't realize, yeah, that this training was like an hour long. We kind of went really deep into the weeds of like these four different types of flops and how they play out potentially on the turn and river. But it does give us a lot of very valuable heuristics to see how to approach these sort of situations. And yeah, it's true that there's a very large number of flops where I've got the exact number. I think it's close to 1,200. I think possible unique flops, like not factoring in the suit as such in poker. And that can sort of feel very overwhelming. Like I know for me that at first I think, okay, there's just so much here. How will I ever possibly get through it all? But the thing is that a lot of the flops do kind of play a little bit similarly and do have kind of similar ideas. Like again, if this was, let's say, a ace 9-7 flop or an ace 7-6, like yeah, there's probably some small difference, but it's not like the most massive difference, let's say. So again, if you kind of take like these general instances of, okay, ace with other high cards, ace with maybe one high card, one low card, ace with two middle cards, ace with two low cards, or say like two disconnected cards, or a paired board or a monotone. You kind of break it down in these categories so that even if you're in a situation maybe you didn't see that exact situation before, you still kind of can use the principles of adapt them to sort of apply in these cases. So I hope that you found this training valuable. If you do have some thoughts in the comments, like whether it's something that you liked or something that maybe I perhaps didn't explain fully, but maybe like more experienced as a solver and can sort of break down something that wasn't obvious to me, then that's certainly something that would be quite valuable as well. But yeah, congrats on making it to the end of this one, and I'll see you in the next training. Take care.